Investigators in Texas now scrambling for answers after they say Melissa Davis was burned alive. The 33-year-old's remains were found along the road in Austin with a butcher knife nearby. So far, no arrests have been made.
One would assume that they're going in a million different directions. I think the first thing they're doing is an autopsy on the body to make a determination as to the cause of death. They're going to have crime scene investigators sift through every single part of the area where she was found to see if there's any evidence. We know they found a knife, but is there any other evidence, DNA, hair fibers, anything that can link or explain what happened to this woman?
Law and crime legal analyst Julie Rendelman says officials are still in the early stages of the investigation without a publicly named suspect. She says they will likely begin by speaking to those who knew Davis best.
Anytime an individual is found in the horrific circumstances that we see here, they're going to start to not necessarily assume that someone close is a suspect, but they're going to want to talk to close family and friends, one, to rule them out, and also to see if they have any understanding of who she was talking to, where she was supposed to be that day, understanding kind of a timeline as to where she would have been and where she should have been. Phone records are always such a huge part of these cases. Were they able to recover a phone? If they're able to recover the phone, are they able to look through the phone to determine who she spoke to, when she spoke to them?
Investigators say Davis's remains were found along the road in Austin, Texas on September 29th. At about 5 o'clock that morning, firefighters responded to a grass fire. Once on the scene, they found Davis's body. She was pronounced dead, and investigators say she'd been burned alive. A police canine later helped recover a butcher knife near the body. Officials believe the knife was, quote, placed with the decedent in an attempt to destroy the evidence with the fire.
We know a butcher knife was found, and again, reports have indicated that the knife was somewhat buried next to the victim. So, of course, police are going to want to know, is there any DNA on that knife? Is there any fingerprints on that weapon? Were there any injuries to the victim that would have been caused by that weapon? Was that weapon there before this incident happened and it has nothing to do with it? We just don't know yet. But certainly, this seems to be at least a clue in determining what happened to her and maybe figuring out who the person is that's responsible.
Investigators also hope to gather information from Davis's vehicle, a 2016 Toyota 4Runner. Right now, officials are searching for this vehicle, asking anyone in the Austin area to come forward with more information. They released this photo of the vehicle with a Texas license plate reading KYV3765.
And I think also one of the big things that they seem to be talking about is her car is missing. So they're going to be looking for leads, looking for anyone who has seen this car, seen the license plate, seen anyone driving it, anywhere, any information to help figure out just what happened and who's responsible.
Rendelman says finding the vehicle could lead investigators to more evidence or even a suspect.
The first thing they're going to want to know is who's driving that vehicle. Is the person, if there is someone driving that vehicle, is that the person responsible? Does that person know who might be responsible? They're going to want to know where the car is. Does the car itself have any evidence inside of it? DNA, clothing, a phone of the victims, anything that can link it back to the victim and potentially a defendant.
Even though a suspect hasn't been arrested or publicly named, Rendelman says it's likely investigators know more than they're letting on.
We always assume that when an investigation like this occurs, police, law enforcement are going to provide some information to the public to get their assistance. With that said, we also assume that there's going to be evidence they don't want to relay because they do want to keep certain pieces close to the vest because that may impact their ability to do a thorough and careful investigation. So at this point, I would suspect they may have some information they're not telling the public, and only time will tell what that evidence is.
For narrowing in on a suspect, Rendelman says it could be someone who knew Davis well, considering the nature of her murder.
I think some will argue that the type of crime we're looking at seems to be very personal in nature, between the victim and potentially the suspect. And again, sometimes we're wrong. Sometimes this is an individual that is predatory and that is going to go and seek other women that they may do it to. Again, we don't know. I think that there's no question law enforcement is going to be on the alert for any type of copycat crimes or any crimes that in any way relate to this. We obviously hope that there is no other victims or potential victims in danger. But again, I think that this is very early in the investigation.
Part of that investigation includes taking a closer look at Davis's remains and whether any drugs or alcohol could have been involved.
An autopsy is so important in this case because it's going to allow medical examiner to determine whether or not there was any underlying injuries besides the burns. And so it is possible that the fact that she was burned potentially alive may have an impact on their ability to do that. But certainly they're also going to want to take blood samples from her, determining whether she was using alcohol, whether drugs were involved, whether someone gave her drugs. There's so many possibilities of things that happened. And again, this is kind of a wait and see thing, but it's going to be imperative for the medical examiner to make a determination exactly what happened to her.
If a suspect is arrested and the case heads to trial, Rendelman expects much of the crime scene evidence will be brought into court. Investigators on the scene noted they smelled a, quote, strong odor of accelerant near Davis's remains. Rendelman says even smell could be admissible in court.
When law enforcement, assuming someone is arrested and law enforcement is called to testify, one would expect that when they're asked to describe the crime scene, the first thing they're going to say is when we arrived, besides seeing the horrific scene, that they noticed a strong odor of accelerant. That's going to help the jury understand best what they were dealing with and what their expectation was in terms of what they might find.
And if a suspect is charged with Davis's murder and convicted, death penalty could be on the table.
Anytime you are dealing with a murder case in a state in which capital punishment is allowed, there's always a possibility that prosecutors will seek the death penalty. Again, I think it's too early to tell. There's so many questions to be asked in terms of, A, if they find the individual, whether or not the individual has a criminal record. Is there any mitigation in regards to this person's background that may take death penalty off the table? There's just too much that we don't know yet before we could even begin to think about that.
Officials ask anyone with more information about Davis's vehicle or her murder contact the Austin Police Department or Crime Stoppers. A $1,000 reward is also being offered for information leading to the arrest of a suspect. Reporting for Law&Crime Network, I'm Sierra Gillespie.